I'm Nathan Carter. I'm 36 years old, and my own father texted me to say I was cut out of the family, just hours before I was set to close the biggest deal of my career. Before I tell you about the 72 missed calls, the panicked accountants, and the moment my entire family realized I held all the cards, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always good to know you're not talking into a void, you know? The city looked like a circuit board from my office on the 58th floor. A million little lights, a million different lives, all moving with a purpose. That's New York for you. It's a city that respects momentum. If you're not moving forward, you're being left behind. For the last 10 years, I'd done nothing but move forward. I was a corporate lawyer at a top-tier firm, and that afternoon, I was at the one-yard line of a multi-billion-dollar merger. The air in my office was thick with the smell of coffee, paper, and adrenaline. This deal was my baby. It was my ticket to a partnership. It was the culmination of a decade of sleepless nights and sacrificed weekends. My phone buzzed on the glass desk, a short, sharp vibration that cut through my concentration. I glanced at it, expecting a message from my associate, Marcus, with the latest draft of the closing documents. But it wasn't Marcus. It was my father. My thumb hovered over the notification. A text from my dad was rare. A phone call was his preferred method of issuing decrees, his voice booming with authority. A text felt sterile, impersonal. It was the kind of communication you use to cancel a dentist appointment, not to detonate your family. Felt final. I tapped it open. The words were stark against the white background. No greeting, no explanation, just 5 words in cold, blue font. Don't come to the family reunion. We're cutting ties. That was it. I read it once, then twice. My world, which had been a whirlwind of contracts and conference calls, went completely silent. The hum of the city outside, the frantic energy that usually fueled me, faded away. It was just me and those 5 words. There was no hot surge of anger. There was no gut-wrenching sorrow. If I'm being completely honest with you, the first thing I felt was quiet. A profound, echoing quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm you've been living in your whole life finally, mercifully, passes. I didn't need to ask why. The family reunion was an annual affair hosted at my parents' sprawling estate in Connecticut. It was less about family and more about performance. A showcase for my father, Richard Carter, to display his success to friends, business partners, and distant relatives. His 2 sons were a part of that display. My older brother, Eric, was the prized exhibit, the handsome, charming heir to Carter Properties, the family real estate empire. And I was the other one, the lawyer, the one who got away, but not far enough that I couldn't be summoned back to play my part, to round out the perfect picture. This year, apparently, my part had been written out of the script. My fingers moved on their own, a testament to years of training myself to react with logic, not emotion. I typed a single word back to him. Understood. I hit send. Then I put the phone down on the desk with a soft click. I picked up my other line, my personal line, the one that wasn't for family drama. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice before he picked up. Thomas Grayson. His voice was sharp, efficient, the voice of a man who bills in 6-minute increments. Thomas wasn't just my best friend. He was the smartest, most ruthless litigator I knew. Thomas, it's me, I said, my own voice startlingly even. It's time. Initiate the process. There was a brief, calculated pause on the other end. He didn't need to ask what process. We'd had the documents drawn up for over a year, sitting in a secure digital file for a day I secretly hoped would never come. Or maybe a small, honest part of me had been waiting for it all along. Are you sure, Nate? He asked, the professionalism softening almost imperceptibly into the concern of a friend. There's no going back from this. This is the nuclear option. I looked at the text from my father one last time, the 5 words that were meant to be my dismissal. Then I deleted the entire thread, erasing him from my phone. I'm sure, I said, and the quiet inside me was replaced by a cold, hard clarity I hadn't felt in years. Send the official notice to the bank and to Carter Properties. By the book. Certified mail. No room for interpretation. I hung up the phone. The first domino had just been pushed. And as I turned back to the billion-dollar merger on my desk, for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was in control of my own life. Before you can understand the sheer, earth-shattering panic that my one-word text and a single phone call would unleash, you have to understand the foundation our family was built on. It wasn't love or respect or any of the things you see in holiday commercials. The foundation of the Carter family was expectation, and the currency was approval, handed out exclusively by my father, Richard. And he was a man who believed in scarcity. His approval was a rare commodity, and I spent the first 2 decades of my life trying and failing to earn it. I have this memory. It's so clear. It's like a movie I can play in my head, complete with the sights and smells. I'm 15 years old. I'm standing in the cavernous living room of our house in Connecticut, a place my mother called the Grand Salon. It always smelled faintly of lemon polish, old money, and my mother's Chanel No. 5. I was holding a heavy, framed certificate, the wood dark and ornate. I just won the state-level academic decathlon. It wasn't just a win. I had set a new state record for points. My picture was going to be in the local paper. I remember my heart thumping in my chest, a fragile, stupid hope that maybe, this time, this achievement was shiny enough, important enough to be seen. My father was in his usual throne, a wingback leather chair, reading the Wall Street Journal. A heavy crystal tumbler of scotch was sweating on the antique table beside him. My mother, Diana, ever the family's social director, glided over and nudged him. "Richard, look. Nathan has something to show you." He lowered the paper with a put-upon sigh, his eyes scanning the certificate with the same air of mild impatience he used on catering menus. Academic decathlon. That's nice, son. Good for you." He folded the paper and placed it precisely on his lap. "Did you hear? Eric's coach thinks he has a real shot at a football scholarship to a Division I school. A real shot. Says he's got the arm of a pro. The poise." He looked past me, his face lighting up with a genuine, brilliant smile as my older brother, Eric, walked into the room, effortlessly tossing a football in the air. And just like that, I vanished. My certificate, my state record, it all just dissolved into the background. I was a ghost in my own victory. My mother, a master of damage control, saw the look on my face. She came over later, while I was in my room, the certificate lying face down on my desk. She handed me a small, velvet box. Inside was a sleek, expensive Swiss watch. "This is for your win, darling," she said, her voice a well-practiced, soothing whisper. "You know your father. He's just focused on the business, on the legacy. It's hard for him to show it, but he's proud of you, deep down." The watch felt cold and heavy on my wrist. It wasn't a symbol of pride. It was a payment, a settlement for my disappointment. It was her way of keeping the peace, of smoothing over the cracks in our perfect family portrait before anyone else could see them. I learned early on that in my family, uncomfortable truths were never confronted. They were just redecorated, painted over with a fresh coat of expensive denial. That lesson was driven home 3 years ago, with the full force of a freight train. I was 33, a senior associate at my firm, finally making a name for myself, finally stepping out of the long shadow of being a Carter. I got a summons to my father's office at Carter Properties. Not a request, a summons. His secretary called, her voice clipped and official. "Your father expects you at 4 p.m. His office was a shrine to himself. Floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of Central Park that was worth more than most companies. Dark mahogany walls covered in photos of him shaking hands with minor politicians and forgotten celebrities. Leather-bound books he'd never read. He and my mother were both there, a united front. It was never a good sign. "Nathan," my father began, skipping the pleasantries as he always did. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk, making me feel like a subordinate, not a son. "We need you to do something for the family." He slid a thick stack of documents across the polished desk. The top page read, "Loan and Security Agreement." The bank is extending our credit line for a new development. A big one. The Pearl Street Tower. It's going to be our flagship, he announced. They have a new policy. Some post-recession nonsense about personal guarantees from board members. I picked up the documents. My lawyer brain kicked into high gear, cold and analytical. It wasn't just a personal guarantee. It was a $2 million loan guarantee. My name, my assets, my entire financial future would be on the hook, personally, for $2 million if the company defaulted. Dad, this is substantial, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Why do you need me for this? You and Eric are the primary shareholders. My stake in the family trust is non-voting. It's a formality, Nathan. My mother chimed in, placing her cool, bejeweled hand on my arm. The bank just wants to see the whole family is invested. It shows strength, unity. It's just a signature. This is a test of loyalty, Nathan, my father said, his voice dropping to that low, serious tone he used when he was closing a deal, the one that left no room for argument. It's time to decide. Are you a part of this family, or are you just a guest with the same last name? We need to know where you stand. Every instinct I had, every bit of legal and financial training screamed no. It was a terrible, reckless decision. It was leveraging my own hard-earned financial security for their venture. It was a massive risk with absolutely no reward for me. But I looked at their faces. My father's stern and demanding, his jaw set. My mother's pleading, her eyes silently begging me not to upset the delicate balance of their world, not to cause a scene. I saw 15-year-old me standing there again, holding that useless certificate, desperate for a crumb of approval. I picked up the heavy, gold-plated pen from his desk. The ink felt like a chain, linking me to them in a way I'd spent my whole life trying to escape. I signed my name. Good boy, my father said, clapping me on the shoulder. The gesture was hollow, proprietary. It was the most praise I'd gotten from him in a decade. And it cost me $2 million in liability. Now, back in the present, 3 years later, I was explaining this to my fiancée, Olivia, in the safety of our apartment. Our place had always been my sanctuary. It was filled with her warmth, with mismatched coffee mugs, stacks of books, and the smell of the dinner she was cooking. It was a home, not a showroom. I told her about the text. I told her about the call to Thomas. I expected her to be relieved, to pop open a bottle of wine and celebrate my liberation. But she just stood there by the stove, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her expression unreadable. And then what, Nathan? She asked, her voice quiet but piercing. What do you mean? And then what? I said, a little defensively. It's done. I'm out. The chain is broken. She came over and sat across from me at our small kitchen table. The table was cluttered with our mail and her medical journals, a testament to our real messy life. She took my hand. Her hands were always warm, a stark contrast to my mother's. My love, she said, looking me straight in the eye, her gaze unwavering. I support you. You know I do. I have seen what they do to you for years. But you have to be realistic. You just declared war on Richard Carter. You didn't just decline an invitation to a barbecue. You pulled a multi-million-dollar financial trigger. She squeezed my hand. He is not going to just say, okay, and let it go. This is going to get ugly. He's a bully, and when you stand up to a bully, they don't back down. They punch harder. This is going to affect us. Our wedding savings, the deposit on the venue, our life. He will see me as the enemy, too. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. She was right. I'd been so focused on the liberating act of cutting the cord, I hadn't fully braced for the whiplash. My war wasn't just with my family. It was with my past, and I had just given it a reason to come roaring into my present. He will come after you, Nate, she said softly, but with an edge of steel. And he'll come after you where it hurts the most, at your job, through your friends. He will try to burn everything down around you to prove he's still in control. Are you ready for that? Are we ready for that? I looked at her, at this brilliant, compassionate, and fiercely practical woman who had chosen to build a life with me, despite the baggage I carried. I had to be ready for her. For me. For us. Yeah, I said, trying to inject a confidence into my voice that I didn't fully feel. I'm ready. But as I said it, a sliver of doubt crept in. I had just walked away from a $2 million liability. But I might have just stepped into a conflict that would cost me far more. The quiet I'd felt after sending that text didn't last long. It was the deceptive calm in the eye of a hurricane. By the next morning, the storm wall hit, and it hit with the full force of the Carter family's fury and influence. It didn't start with a phone call from my father. He was too proud for that, too strategic. He wouldn't give me the satisfaction of hearing his own panic. No, he sent his lieutenants first. The attack came on two fronts, the soft approach and the hard one. The soft approach came via email. It was from Eric, and it landed in my inbox just as I was starting my day. The subject line was a casual, "Hey, what's up?" I could almost hear his charming, non-threatening tone through the screen. "Nate," it began. "Heard you won't be making it to the reunion this year. That's a shame. Mom's pretty upset. She was looking forward to seeing you and Olivia. Also, got a strange call from the bank's legal department this morning. Something about the Pearl Street Tower loan. It's probably just some bureaucratic mix-up, you know how they are. But if you could give me a call when you have a second, I'd appreciate it. We need to present a united front on this stuff." United front. The same language they'd used to rope me in 3 years ago. The good cop routine. It was so transparent it was almost insulting. He was pretending not to know what was happening, trying to lure me into a conversation where he could work his charm. I read the email, took a sip of my coffee, and dragged the message straight to the trash. An hour later, the hard approach began. My phone vibrated. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was for my parents' town in Connecticut. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text popped up. "Mr. Carter, this is Edward Pennington from Carter Properties. Your father asked me to reach out. We seem to have a serious issue with the bank that requires your immediate attention. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. It is a matter of extreme urgency. Edward Pennington, my father's chief accountant and right-hand man. A man who had been with the company for 30 years and revered my father like a god. Edward was the fixer, the loyal soldier who handled the dirty work. If Richard was sending his high priest, he wasn't just concerned. He was panicking. And then the floodgates opened. My phone didn't stop buzzing for the rest of the day. It was a relentless, vibrating assault on my senses, a constant reminder of the chaos I had unleashed. First, it was my father's number. Again and again, the calls coming every 15 minutes like clockwork. Then my mother's number would flash, her calls interspersed with texts full of pleading emojis and exclamation points. Then Eric's number, his calls more frequent and frantic. Then back to my father. They left voicemails, each one a masterclass in their own brand of manipulation. My father's were commands. "Nathan, call me. Now, this is not a request." My mother's were guilt trips. "Nathan, darling, what is going on? Your father is furious. You're tearing this family apart. Please just call him. Let's sort this out before it gets worse." Eric's were pure panic. "Nate, what the hell is happening? The bank is talking about a covenant breach." "A covenant breach? Nate, do you know what that means for our credit lines? For the whole company? Call me." I counted them during a lull in my own meetings. 72 missed calls. Dozens of texts. I didn't listen to a single voicemail after the first one from Eric. I didn't read a single text after Pennington's. I put my phone on silent, turned it face down on my desk, and focused on the billion-dollar merger. I let their chaos rage in a little glass and metal box while I meticulously picked apart contracts. My mind a sea of calm. Every unanswered buzz of the phone was a confirmation. I had hit them where they lived, not in their hearts, in their bank accounts. Their power was tied to their money, and I had just pulled a thread that was threatening to unravel the entire tapestry. Later that afternoon, Eric tried a different tactic. Another email. This one was stripped of all pretense of friendliness. The subject was, "Fix this. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, Nathan, but you're about to sink the biggest project we've had in a decade. I spoke to the bank myself. It's not a mix-up. They gave us a 14-day notice to supplement the collateral because you pulled your guarantee. 14 days. Do you have any idea how hard it is to secure $2 million in liquid assets in 2 weeks without setting off alarm bells all over Wall Street? This is a mess. A mess you created. You have a moral and familial obligation to fix it. I leaned back in my chair and almost laughed. A moral obligation. To them. The irony was rich. But the email gave me the information I needed. A 14-day fuse. My pulling the guarantee had triggered a key clause in the loan agreement. The bank saw a significant guarantor leaving and got nervous. They were calling in their markers. Carter Properties had to prove in 2 weeks that they were still good for the money. And from the sound of Eric's panic, they weren't. The final act of the day's siege happened that evening. My doorman called up to my apartment. "Mr. Carter, there's an Edward Pennington here to see you. He says it's urgent." My father had sent his bulldog to my home. The sheer, unmitigated arrogance of it, to think he could just dispatch an employee to my personal sanctuary. I told the doorman, politely but firmly, not to let him up. 2 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Pennington. I let it ring. He left a text. "Nathan, I am in your lobby. Your father sent me. This is not a request. We need to talk about your responsibilities." I was about to block his number when another text came through. This one was from a number I didn't know. But the picture attached was of Eric's wife, Helen. She was a woman who always seemed to be calculating something behind her polite, society smile. A woman whose ambition was palpable. The text was simple, but every word was chosen to apply pressure. "Eric is losing his mind. You should know your father is talking to his lawyers about suing you for breach of fiduciary duty. This is getting out of hand, Nathan. You should handle it before it reflects poorly on everyone." Fiduciary duty? It was a baseless legal threat, pure intimidation. I had no such duty to the company, but it was a classic Richard Carter move. When you can't win on the facts, you bully and you threaten. And Helen's text? It wasn't helpful. It was a subtle jab, a way of putting the blame and the responsibility squarely back on me. You should handle it. She was stirring the pot, enjoying the chaos from a safe distance. I felt a surge of cold anger. They were all so used to me being the one who smoothed things over, the one who absorbed the tension. They couldn't conceive of a world where I wasn't their designated problem solver. The next morning, the final summons arrived. It wasn't a text or a call. It was a formal calendar invite on my work email, sent from my father's executive assistant. The title was Urgent and Private, Carter Family Meeting. The location was a private suite at the St. Regis Hotel, one of my father's favorite spots for power meetings. The time was 7 p.m. the following night. There was no option to decline, only to accept. It wasn't an invitation. It was a subpoena. They were done trying to get me on the phone. They were going to force a confrontation on their turf, in a place designed to intimidate. Fine. Let them. I replied to only one person that day. It was to Eric. I wrote back to his panicked email, hitting reply all, so his lawyer wife would see it too. "Eric," I wrote, "the mess, as you call it, was created 3 years ago when I was pressured into signing a $2 million personal liability as a formality. The game, as you call it, is simply me taking my name off a risk I should never have been exposed to in the first place. My moral obligation is to my own future, not to a company I have no stake in. You told me the family was cutting ties. I am merely finalizing the paperwork. I will be at the meeting, and I suggest you come prepared to listen." I hit send. The ball was back in their court, but the game was still mine, and I had a feeling the next round was going to be the last. The 36 hours leading up to the meeting at the St. Regis were the longest of my life. The initial surge of adrenaline had faded, replaced by a low, humming anxiety. This wasn't a corporate negotiation where both sides had something to gain. This was an exorcism, and I knew they were coming with everything they had. My father made his next move, and it was far more insidious than panicked phone calls or empty legal threats. He tried to professionally assassinate me. It happened on the day of the meeting. I was deep in the final review of the merger documents when my assistant's voice came over the intercom, tight with concern. "Nathan, Mr. Henderson would like to see you in his office, he said right away. Mr. Henderson was the firm's senior partner, a living legend in corporate law. He was in his late 60s, with eyes that had seen everything and a reputation for being able to smell weakness from a mile away. He was the man who would ultimately decide if I made partner. My stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. This was it. My father had somehow poisoned the well. I walked the long hallway to the corner office, my footsteps echoing on the polished marble. My mind raced. What had my father said? What lie had he spun? "Nathan, close the door," Henderson said as I entered. His office was a testament to quiet power, with antique maps on the walls and a view that stretched all the way to the Statue of Liberty. He gestured to the worn leather chair opposite his massive desk. I sat down, my back ramrod straight, feeling like I was on trial. "I had a phone call this morning," he began, steepling his fingers, his gaze intense. "From your father, Richard Carter." I just nodded, my mouth suddenly dry as sandpaper. I braced myself. "He told me he was concerned about you," Henderson continued, a flicker of something that looked like amusement in his eyes. "Said you were acting erratically, that you were under a lot of personal stress that might be affecting your judgment. He suggested, not in so many words, that maybe you should be pulled from the merger until you got your house in order. For the good of the firm, of course. The audacity of it. The cold, calculated cruelty. To use my personal life as a weapon. To try and sabotage the single biggest achievement of my career. I felt a hot flash of rage. Something purer and hotter than anything I had felt through this whole ordeal. It was a violation. Henderson watched me, his expression unchanging. "Your father is a formidable businessman, Nathan. A real estate titan. But he's a terrible liar. He has the subtlety of a sledgehammer. A man like that doesn't call a son's boss out of concern. He does it as a power play, a threat. He was trying to see if he could pull your strings here at your own firm." He leaned forward slightly. "All that call told me is that you must be doing something right to make a man like that so desperate. It also told me you have ice water in your veins to be able to function at this level with that kind of pressure on you." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The relief was so intense it almost made me dizzy. "The merger is yours," Henderson said, his tone final. "Don't let him get in your head. Family money can be the dirtiest money there is. Remember that. Now get out of my office. You're burning daylight." I walked back to my office on unsteady legs. Henderson's support was a shield, but the spear had still hit. My father had crossed a line I didn't even know existed. He hadn't just tried to control me. He had tried to destroy the one thing that was entirely mine. The success I had built with my own two hands. That night, back at my apartment, the armor finally cracked. The weight of it all, the years of dismissal, the financial manipulation, the attack on my career, came crashing down. I was sitting on the couch in the dark, the city lights a blur through the window. For the first time, I felt a wave of profound doubt, a terrifying, hollow feeling in the pit of my stomach. What if I was wrong? What if I had pushed it too far? I was taking on my entire family, a powerful, wealthy machine that would stop at nothing to protect itself. I had just thrown my entire life, and Olivia's, into a fire, and for what? To prove a point? The door opened and closed softly. Olivia came in, home from a long, draining shift at the hospital. She found me in the dark and didn't say a word at first. She just kicked off her shoes, dropped her bag, and came to sit beside me. Her presence a silent, solid comfort. "He tried to get me fired today," I said, my voice barely a whisper, the words tasting like ash. She took my hand. "I know," she said. "Your friend Thomas called me. He was worried." I finally looked at her, my confident facade completely gone. Maybe this was a mistake, Liv. Maybe I should have just let it go. Gone to the stupid reunion. Kept playing the part. What if he ruins me? What if I lose everything? Her expression hardened, but not with anger at me. It was with a fierce, protective fire that seemed to burn away the shadows in the room. She moved so she was facing me directly, her hands coming up to cup my face. "Listen to me, Nathan Carter," she said. her voice low and intense. Did you think this would be easy? Did you think they would just roll over? Did you think your father, of all people, would just say, "You're right, son, my mistake"? You have been their shock absorber your entire life. The moment you decided to stand up straight, you knew it was going to hurt. You started this war. Now you have to be prepared to win it. Her thumbs gently stroked my cheeks. They attacked your career. They attacked our future. This isn't about money anymore. It's about who you are. So you are going to walk into that hotel tomorrow, and you are going to finish it. I am with you, but you need to be with yourself right now. No more doubts. You are not the scared little boy with the certificate anymore. You are the man I am going to marry. Her words cut through the fear and the fog like a laser. She was right. This wasn't a retreat. It was a counteroffensive. My resolve hardened, no longer cold and brittle, but forged into something stronger in the fire of her belief in me. My mind was suddenly clear. I wasn't just a defendant anymore. I was a prosecutor, and I needed to prepare my case with my best witness. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. My cousin, Rebecca. She was the family's other outcast, the one who had the audacity to get a degree in computer science and take a job in IT auditing for a major accounting firm instead of joining a respectable field like business or law. "Nate?" she answered, her voice full of surprise. "Is everything okay? I've been hearing things." Mom said Aunt Diana called her in a tizzy. "I'm fine, Becca," I said, a smile touching my lips for the first time all day. "But I have a professional question for you. A hypothetical." "Okay," she said, and I could hear the intrigue in her voice. "Hypothetically," I said, choosing my words carefully. "If someone at a company like Carter Properties, which runs on a slightly outdated server system, wanted to create fraudulent loan documents but make it look legitimate, how would they do it? And more importantly, what kind of digital footprint would it leave? Where would an auditor look for the breadcrumbs that the person creating the documents might not even know they're leaving?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, I heard the distinctive sound of a mechanical keyboard clicking, fast and rhythmic. "That's a very specific hypothetical, Nate," she said, her voice now sharp and focused, all business. "Let me do some thinking. An old server system, sloppy protocols. That's a recipe for leaving tracks. I might be able to find some hypothetical answers for you. Give me a few hours." I hung up. The board was set. The pieces were in motion. Tomorrow it was checkmate. The private suite at the St. Regis was decorated in shades of gold and cream, opulent and suffocating. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and tension. It felt like a gilded cage, a place where messy problems were resolved with expensive champagne and quiet threats. My father, mother, and Eric were already there, arranged on velvet couches like a royal family holding court. My father sat in the center, of course, a king on a temporary throne, his posture ramrod straight. My mother was beside him, her back not touching the couch, a forced, brittle smile plastered on her face. Her hands were clenched around a small clutch in her lap. But Eric was the most interesting. He sat slightly apart from them in his own armchair. He wasn't looking at his phone or at our parents. He was staring at the intricate pattern on the Persian rug, his hands clasped between his knees. He didn't look like a golden child, the confident heir apparent. He looked like a man waiting for a verdict. He looked scared. "Nathan," my father began, his voice a low rumble of authority that used to make me shrink. He didn't even offer me a seat. "Thank you for gracing us with your presence. Now let's end this foolishness. This little rebellion of yours is over. You will call the bank in the morning and retract your notice. Edward has the paperwork ready. You will sign it, and we will forget this unfortunate and frankly embarrassing lapse in your judgment." He spoke as if the outcome was already decided, as if I were a petulant child who had thrown a tantrum and was now being put back in his place after a stern talking to. I didn't sit down. I remained standing in the middle of the room, forcing them to look up at me, creating a different power dynamic. I looked past him, at my mother's anxious face, then at my brother's bowed head, before finally letting my gaze settle on my father. "There's been no lapse in judgment," I said, my voice calm and even, cutting through the heavy silence. There has been a correction. A correction of a mistake I was manipulated into making 3 years ago. My father scoffed, a short, ugly sound. A mistake? Your only mistake is biting the hand that feeds you. This family, this company has given you everything. The education, the name, the opportunities. That company has given you everything? I countered, my voice hardening slightly. I have never taken a dime from Carter Properties that I didn't earn at my own firm. But that's not the point. We need to talk about that $2 million loan. You told me it was a formality, a show of unity for a new development. And it was, Richard snapped, his knuckles white as he gripped the arm of the couch. No, I said, shaking my head slowly, deliberately. It wasn't. I did some research. Carter Properties didn't have any new developments in the pipeline 3 years ago. There was no Pearl Street Tower. In fact, your corporate credit rating was downgraded that quarter after a deal in Miami fell through. You weren't expanding. You were scrambling. That $2 million wasn't for a new tower, Dad. It was to cover a massive shortfall on your existing debt. It was a bailout. My signature didn't build something new. It saved you from sinking. The air went out of the room. My mother's smile finally vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. She looked at my father, her eyes wide with a question he couldn't answer. He was speechless, his face turning a dark shade of crimson. He had been exposed. His foundational lie, the one that had formed the basis of his hold over me, was gone. But before he could recover, before he could formulate a new lie or launch into a fresh attack, something incredible happened. Eric stood up. He's right, Eric said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a confession. He still wasn't looking at me. He was looking at our father, a man he had spent his whole life trying to please. It's worse than that, Dad. My father's head whipped around to face his favored son, his eyes blazing with betrayal. Eric, what in God's name are you doing? Sit down. No, Eric said, and for the first time in his life, he sounded like his own man, not just an echo of our father. I started digging after the bank called. I couldn't understand the numbers. They didn't make sense. The financials you showed me, they were wrong. He finally lifted his head, and his eyes met mine across the room. There was no warmth, just a grim, shared understanding. He pulled out his tablet. The $2 million from Nathan. It wasn't the only time you used him as a backstop. There are 2 other loans, Dad. Smaller ones. From a regional bank. Totaling another $3 million. He swiped his finger on the screen and turned the tablet around. On the screen were scanned documents. Loan agreements. And at the bottom of each was a signature. My signature. A signature I had never made in my life. You forged my name, I said, the words falling from my lips. A statement of fact, not a question. The quiet accusation was more powerful than a shout. Those are fakes, my father bellowed, finally finding his voice. He was on his feet now, his face contorted with a desperate, cornered rage. This is a conspiracy. It was Pennington. Edward handled all the paperwork with the regional banks. He must have done it. He overstepped. It was a pathetic, desperate attempt to shift the blame, to sacrifice his most loyal soldier to save himself. My mother let out a small, strangled sob, her hand flying to her mouth. The perfect family portrait was shattering into a million pieces right in front of her, and she couldn't do a thing to stop it. And in that moment of chaos, as my father was ranting about loyalty and betrayal, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A single, silent vibration. I pulled it out. It was an email from Rebecca. The subject line, hypothetical answer. Attached was a single, password-protected PDF. You can blame Edward, I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a surgeon's scalpel. You can blame anyone you want, but it's hard to blame him for this. I airdropped the file to the large smart TV on the wall of the suite. A second later, the screen flickered to life. It displayed a log, a digital paper trail. It showed the fraudulent loan documents, the same ones Eric had on his tablet. But this report, compiled by a professional IT auditor, showed something more. It showed the IP address of the computer that created them. It showed the user login. It showed the exact timestamp they were created, saved, and then deleted from the local drive. The user login was R. Carter. The computer was the Dell desktop registered to my father's executive office at Carter Properties. The time was 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night 6 months ago. I looked at my father. The rage was gone. The bluster was gone. All that was left was the hollowed-out look of a king who had been dethroned in his own throne room. He stared at the screen, at the undeniable digital proof of his crime, and I saw the last of his power drain away. Checkmate. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument could ever be. It was a silence filled with the wreckage of a 40-year marriage, a broken brotherhood, and a business empire built on a foundation of lies. My father sank back into his chair, looking small and defeated, a deflated balloon of a man. Eric stood frozen, staring at the screen, the reality of the situation cementing on his face. He hadn't just exposed our father. He had exposed the rot at the core of his own inheritance. The company he was meant to lead was a house of cards. I turned to leave. My part was done. I had presented my case, the evidence was irrefutable, and the verdict was clear. There was nothing left to say. Nathan, wait. It was my mother's voice, thin and reedy, a ghost of its former, commanding tone. I stopped at the door but didn't turn around. Couldn't look at her. I couldn't see the desperate hope in her eyes that I would somehow fix this, that I would rewind the tape, that I would sweep the broken pieces of her life back under the antique Persian rug. I heard her footsteps, the soft rustle of her silk dress on the plush carpet. She stood behind me, so close I could feel the nervous energy radiating off her. Why? She whispered, and the question was loaded with a lifetime of willful ignorance. Why did you do this to us? To your father? After everything we've given you? I finally turned, just enough to see her face. The carefully applied makeup, meant to project an image of effortless elegance, couldn't hide the devastation. The perfect hostess mask had crumbled, revealing the terrified woman beneath. I didn't do this, Mom, I said, my voice devoid of anger, just filled with a profound, weary sadness. He did, and you let him. You stood by and you watched him do it, year after year. I paused, letting the words hang in the air between us. An uncomfortable truth she could no longer redecorate. You want to know why I didn't just let it go? Why I didn't come to you sooner? Because I knew exactly what you would do. You would have chosen him. You always have. You would have asked me to sign another paper, to take on another risk, to sacrifice another piece of myself to keep his kingdom intact. You would have called it keeping the peace. But it was never peace, Mom. It was just a quiet surrender. My surrender. I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes. The devastating truth of my words hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had been the chief enabler, the guardian of a toxic secret. Her life's work hadn't been building a family. It had been managing a facade. She took a step back, as if my words were a physical force. She looked from me to the broken man on the couch, and I could see the final gear click into place in her mind. She wasn't just looking at a bad husband. She was looking at a bad investment that had finally gone bust. I left without another word and didn't look back. The second meeting was a few days later. It wasn't in a fancy hotel suite. It was in a sterile, impersonal conference room at Thomas's law firm, a place of neutral ground. It was just me, Thomas, and Eric. Eric had brought his own lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who looked like she ate nails for breakfast. This wasn't a family chat. This was a legal negotiation. The air was cold and smelled of photocopier toner. Eric looked exhausted. He had aged 10 years in a week. The dark circles under his eyes were stark against his pale skin. "What do you want, Nathan?" he asked, getting straight to the point. His voice was flat, devoid of its usual charm. "Want?" I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "I don't want anything from you, Eric. I've already gotten it. I'm off the loan. My name is clear." "You could ruin us," Eric said, his voice dropping. "You could go to the authorities." The DA would have a field day with this. Forgery, bank fraud. Dad would go to jail. The company would be finished. The Carter name would be mud. He was right. I held a nuclear bomb, and all I had to do was push a button. Thomas sat silently beside me, his face impassive, letting me lead. This was my call. The company is your problem, Eric. Not mine, I said coolly. And Dad. He's your problem, too. Eric's lawyer, seeing her client was floundering, stepped in. My client is prepared to make a proposal, she said, her voice crisp. Carter Properties will immediately clear the $2 million guarantee with the bank. Furthermore, they are prepared to compensate Mr. Carter for the fraudulent loans taken out in his name, plus a significant sum for damages related to the risk he was exposed to. We can draw up a settlement. A very, very generous one. In exchange for what? Thomas asked, finally speaking, his voice like ice. In exchange for a non-disclosure agreement, she said. A legally binding guarantee that this matter remains a private, family affair. They were trying to buy my silence, to put a price on my father's freedom. A year ago, I would have been insulted, maybe even tempted. But now I just felt tired. My war wasn't about punishing my father anymore. It was about freeing myself. Sending him to prison wouldn't make me any freer. It would just tie me to him, to his drama, to appeals and trials for years to come. I don't want your money, Eric, I said, looking my brother in the eye. He looked up, surprised. His lawyer looked momentarily thrown. I want two things, I continued, leaning forward slightly. First, a formal, notarized document signed by you and by him, acknowledging the fraudulent loans and releasing me from any and all liability, past, present, and future, related to Carter Properties or any of its subsidiaries. I want legal armor so thick that nothing from your world can ever touch me again. Done, Eric said immediately, a hint of relief in his voice. Second, I said, my voice dropping, I want a letter of apology. From him. Not a PR statement drafted by you. Not a legal document. A real one. On his personal letterhead. Admitting what he did. Eric stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. He'll never do that. His pride. I know, I said, cutting him off. But you're going to make him. Because you need me to stay quiet more than I need him to be punished. That's your leverage, Eric. For once in your life, use it. I stood up, signaling the meeting was over. You have 1 week to get it to my lawyer's office. Otherwise, all bets are off. I walked out of the room, Thomas a step behind me, leaving my brother to clean up the mess our father had made. It wasn't a happy ending. It wasn't a heartwarming reconciliation. It was a severance. Clean, cold, and brutally final. And it was exactly what I needed. The next 6 months were like waking up from a long, feverish dream. The constant, low-grade anxiety that had been my lifelong companion, a background hum I had become so used to I barely noticed it, was just gone. I had expected to feel a void, a phantom limb where my family used to be. Instead, all I felt was space. Clean, quiet, open space. Space to breathe. Space to build. Space to simply be. The first sign that my world had fundamentally shifted happened at work, about a month after the showdown at the St. Regis. Mr. Henderson called me into his office. The big merger I'd been working on had closed successfully, a massive, complicated win for the firm. I walked in expecting a standard pat on the back and maybe a more generous bonus than usual. Instead, he gestured for me to sit down in the worn leather chair opposite his desk. Nathan, he said, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. The board met this morning. We were all incredibly impressed with your handling of the Atherton merger. Not just the result, but the grit you showed under what I now understand to have been extreme personal pressure. He paused, then slid a small, heavy business card across the desk. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock, with the firm's logo embossed in navy blue. My name was on it, and under my name was a new title, Partner. I stared at the card. The letters seemed to shimmer. Partner. It was the goal I had been working towards for a decade. The pinnacle of my profession. The thing I thought would finally make my father look at me with something resembling respect. "Your father's little stunt," Henderson continued, leaning back in his chair. "It was a test. Not one we set, but a test nonetheless. You didn't flinch. You didn't break. You protected the firm and you protected the deal when you had every reason to be distracted. That's what a partner does. Welcome to the top floor, Nathan. You've earned it." I picked up the card, the sharp corner pressing into my palm. This piece of paper felt more real, more valuable than any praise my father had ever given me. This wasn't a gift. It wasn't a settlement. It was a recognition of my value, given freely by people who judged me on my merit, not my bloodline. The irony was, I didn't need my father's respect anymore. I had earned my own. The news from my old world came in trickles, like dispatches from a distant, war-torn country. I saw an article in the Wall Street Journal a couple of months later. Carter Properties sells off key commercial division in major restructuring. The buyer was a large private equity conglomerate with deep political ties. I recognized the name immediately. It was owned by the family of Eric's wife, Helen. Her quiet, patient manipulations had paid off. She had watched the house of Carter begin to crumble and had positioned her family to pick up the most valuable pieces for pennies on the dollar. She had played the long game and won a piece of the kingdom. I felt a strange sense of detachment reading it, like reading a history book. It had nothing to do with me anymore. Thomas told me he'd heard through the legal grapevine that my father had been forced into a quiet, unceremonious retirement. Eric was now CEO of a much smaller, debt-laden company, fighting for its survival. He was finally the king, but he had inherited a castle made of sand. I pictured him in my father's old office, with its hollowed-out legacy, and I didn't feel envy or pity. I felt nothing at all. The letter of apology arrived at Thomas's office on the 7th day, exactly as I had demanded. Thomas forwarded a scan of it to me. It was one page, typed on my father's heavy, cream-colored personal letterhead. It was stiff, formal, and clearly written through gritted teeth. It admitted to the unauthorized use of my signature on certain financial documents and expressed regret for any distress this may have caused. It was the most pathetic, non-apology apology I had ever read. It was a masterpiece of saying something while saying nothing at all. And yet I had won. He had been forced to write it. He had been forced to bend his pride and put his name to a confession. I saved the digital copy to a secure drive, instructed Thomas to file the original away, and never looked at it again. My new life was being built on a different foundation. It was built in the quiet, easy moments with Olivia. It was in the loud, boisterous laughter with my friends. It was in the simple, joyful act of planning our wedding. We decided against a big, lavish affair like my parents would have demanded. No country clubs, no 5-course meals for 300 guests I barely knew, no showboating. Instead, we found a small, beautiful restaurant in the West Village with a garden in the back, strung with fairy lights. The guest list had 40 names. My real family. Thomas was my best man, and he gave a speech that was both hilarious and deeply moving. Rebecca, my cousin, who I now spoke to at least once a week, was sitting at the head table, her sharp wit making Olivia's parents laugh. She had become a real friend, a real cousin. We were two survivors of the same shipwreck, building a new shore for ourselves. One afternoon, a few weeks before the wedding, Olivia and I were at a bakery in Brooklyn, tasting cakes. It was a ridiculous, happy, normal thing to be doing on a Tuesday. The air smelled of sugar and butter. She smeared a bit of lemon buttercream on my nose, and I laughed, a real, unburdened laugh. "You seem different," she said, her eyes sparkling with a light that I felt reflected in my own soul. "Different how?" I asked, stealing a raspberry from a sample plate. "Lighter," she said, her voice soft. "Like you've finally put down something heavy you've been carrying your whole life. Something you carried for so long you forgot what it felt like to not be carrying it." And I knew she was right. I hadn't just cut ties with my family. I had cut ties with the person I used to be. The boy who was desperate for his father's approval, the man who was willing to shrink himself to fit into their world. I had finally realized that their world was too small for me. The biggest change wasn't the promotion or the money or the legal victory. It was the quiet, unshakable confidence that came from knowing my own worth. It wasn't something anyone could give me, and it wasn't something anyone could take away. Not anymore. I was the architect of my own life now, and I was finally building something that was meant to last. Our wedding was perfect. Not perfect in the way my mother would define it. No press mentions, no powerful guests to impress. It was perfect because it was ours. It was a warm evening in September. The garden filled with the soft glow of fairy lights and the sound of a live jazz trio. There were no grand speeches about legacy, no talk of business acquisitions. Just love and laughter and the happy, genuine chatter of people who were there because they genuinely wanted to celebrate with us. My family wasn't my blood anymore. It was the collection of people who had chosen to stand with me, who had seen me for who I was and loved me not in spite of my past, but because of the person it had forged me to become. A few months later, Olivia and I stood on the balcony of our new apartment. We'd bought a place downtown, in a building that valued sleek, modern design over old, stuffy tradition. It had a sprawling terrace with a view of the city I loved. The night was clear and cold, the lights of the skyscrapers glittering like a carpet of fallen stars against the dark velvet sky. It was a view that screamed success, power, wealth. A view my father would have appreciated for its monetary value, for the status it represented. But as I stood there, with Olivia's head on my shoulder, her warmth seeping into my side, I saw something different. I saw a city of connections, of stories, of millions of new beginnings happening every single day. My life was no longer defined by a toxic, one-sided relationship with a man I could never please. My value was no longer determined by a father who saw me as a tool, a means to an end. My future was no longer chained to their expectations. The freedom I felt in that moment was more valuable than any inheritance. The peace I felt in the quiet of the night was more profound than any apology. "Do you ever think about them?" Olivia asked softly, her voice barely carrying over the distant, romantic hum of the city. "Do you wonder if they'll ever change? If he'll ever understand?" I thought about it for a moment. I thought about my father, isolated in his forced retirement, rattling around a house that was too big for him. I thought about my mother, trying to build a new life for herself, separate from the identity she'd had for 40 years. I thought about Eric, struggling to keep his diminished empire afloat. I felt a flicker of something, but it wasn't anger or pity. It was just distance, like watching a boat you used to be on sail away until it was just a dot on the horizon. I turned and looked at my wife, her face illuminated by the city glow. I saw my partner, my best friend, my entire world, right here beside me, and I smiled. "You know," I said, pulling her closer and kissing the top of her head. "For the first time in my life, I realized I don't care, and I meant it. Their story was over. Mine was just beginning. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between your own well-being and keeping the peace? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.